On the bottom toolbar of AutoCAD, which is also called status toggle, you'll see these two icons, ortho mode and polar tracking. If these two icons are not visible, then click on this customization button and turn on ortho mode and polar tracking. Once it is turned on, go to any command. I'll select line for explaining use of ortho and polar tracking. So right now you can see that polar tracking has been turned on. Click in the drawing area and now move your cursor. When you move your cursor, you'll see that a green tracking vector appears when the line is completely horizontal. Let's rotate this line, and now you can again see the green tracking vector when the line is completely vertical. Let's rotate it towards another side, and again tracking vector after an interval of 90 degrees, and there is again a tracking vector after an interval of 90 degrees. So after every 90 degree we see a green tracking vector, and this line will be somewhat restricted to horizontal or vertical axis. So in this way it will facilitate making a drawing to those particular angles, and that can be done using this polar tracking. So when you click on this small arrow on the right of this polar tracking, you'll see that 90 is turned on, and obviously with 90, 180, 270 and 360 are also turned on. Let's go and change this value to 30 units now. Now when you move your cursor, you'll obviously see a green tracking vector 0-degree angle, but when you move it further, you'll see that there is one more tracking vector which is at 30 degrees, and then again at 60 degrees and 90 and 120. So we can clearly see that at an interval of every 30 degrees now a tracking vector will be there. So in this way you can restrict your cursor to certain angles, and it will help you in making drawings restricted to some angles without entering angle values. Although we have good amount of angles here, but if you're not satisfied with these many angles, you can apply your own angle as well from tracking settings. So click on this tracking settings and click on this additional angles checkbox, and now click on new. Let's say that we want to enter 18 degrees as our new angle, and now click OK. So when you click on this arrow, you'll see that 18 degrees has been added, and also the multiples of 18 are added. So let's go and turn this on. Let's select line, and now you'll see that after an interval of 18 degree the tracking vector appears, and at an interval of every 18 degrees the tracking vector will appear. You can turn it off, or you can change this value by clicking on the default value or any other value which you like. In case you want to delete this default value, go to tracking settings again, select the angle value and click on delete and click OK. Now let's click on this ortho mode. When you do this, you'll see that this polar tracking is automatically turned off, so you can only keep either ortho mode turned on or polar tracking. So let's delete these geometries, and now let's select this line again. Now if I try to make this line, you'll see that no matter where my cursor moves, it will always make a horizontal or a vertical line. So if ortho mode is turned on, so irrespective of the position of your cursor, only a horizontal or vertical line can be created. If you try to snap this cursor to any other point, then only a line inclined to an angle will be created. So if I click on this point, then only a line which is inclined can be created. Otherwise I'll only be able to make a horizontal or vertical line. Let's press enter to exit this command. If you turn off this ortho mode as well, and this polar tracking is already turned off, and if you select any command, let's say line, and you try to make a line, it will be very difficult for you to make a completely horizontal or a completely vertical line. So since this tracking vector is appearing, it is not because of this polar tracking, but rather it is because of object snap tracking. We'll learn about this in coming videos. So far we have made drawing using command line, but you can also make your drawing using dynamic input. On the status toggle here, you will see this DIN mode or dynamic input button. If you can't see this, then click on this customization and turn on dynamic input from this menu. Once this dynamic input is turned on, click on this icon and now select any command. Now when you select a command, you'll see that along with your cursor a tooltip appears, which is exactly equal to the options which you see on command line. So when you compare it with the command line, you'll see that the command line is also indicating you to enter the first point of this line. So you can clearly see that command line prompts you to specify first point, and here on the tooltip of this cursor you can see it's mentioned as a specify first point. And when you move your cursor, you'll see that x and y coordinates of this point or the current position changes. Let's click at this point. Now since we have clicked, you'll see that the values now change, and now you can see a distance. So this will be the distance of this line, which you can see in the first box. So in this case, let's enter the distance of 200 units. When you do so, this line will get locked to a distance of 200 units. So after entering this distance, press tab, and when you do this, you'll see that a lock icon appears with this distance box, and now the selection moves on to angle. Now you can enter angle about which you want to incline this line with respect to x-axis. So let's enter 30 degrees. You don't need to enter any symbol for degrees, and press enter. As soon as you do this, you'll see that we have a line with a length of 200 units and which is inclined to an angle of 30 degrees with respect to positive direction of x-axis. Now in this way you can continue making this line. Let's press enter again to exit this command. Now let's select circle for our next tool. So when you select circle, you'll see most of the commands which you can find here on command line. So specify center point for circle, it can be seen on command line as well on tooltip, but there is a small arrow icon which accompanies this specify center point for circle along with this tooltip. So this arrow icon is indicating the downward arrow of your keyboard. So when you press that arrow, you'll see that a menu appears which is exactly the same menu which you can see on your command line. So the sub commands or the sub options of this command line appears on your tooltip. Now when you press down button again, you'll see this small dot which moves, and now you can select your options from this menu as well. So let's select 2P, which is for 2-point circle, and press enter. Now your command changes to specify first endpoint of circle diameter. So here we have this first endpoint, and now we are entering the second endpoint, and instead of making a circle with radius or diameter value, we have a circle with 2 points. If you're not comfortable with dynamic input, you can simply turn it off by clicking on this dynamic input button. In order to select a point precisely using AutoCAD, you need to use Object Snap. So you'll see Object Snap on the status toggle here. So here we have this Object Snap icon, and if you can't find this Object Snap icon, then click on this customization and turn on 2D Object Snap. Once turned on, when you select any object, any drawing object, and move your cursor close to any other geometry which is already present in your drawing, AutoCAD will attract cursor towards that point. So in this case, you can see that a tooltip with endpoint indicates that simply means that right now, even if you click at a certain distance from that endpoint, AutoCAD will snap that line to exactly that endpoint, which we can see here. So now you can directly make a line, and you don't need to worry whether your line is exactly snapping to that point or not. Now let's go and turn this Object Snap off, and let's try to make a line that exactly fit at the intersection point of these two lines, and let's try to be as precise as possible, and now press enter. So in this case we have used Object Snap, but in this case Object Snap was not used. So let's zoom in. So when you zoom in, you'll find that this is exactly ending at the intersection of these two lines or at the end point of any of these lines which we have selected. But when you move your cursor to this one and when you zoom in further, you see that we are not exactly snapping it at the correct point. So this was the correct point, but it is not snapping. So in order to snap it to exact point, you need to keep Object Snap turned on. So let's zoom out and erase the geometry. So object snaps are of many types, and to find out which type of object snap we are tracking to or which we are snapping to, you can click on this small icon. When you do so, you'll see menu with plenty of snapping points, and there are some snapping points which are turned on, indicated by this tick mark, and there are some snapping points which are not turned on. So right now endpoint, midpoint and center is turned on. That simply means that you can now snap to the endpoint of a line, midpoint of a line, and to a center of a circle or an arc. Let's check these three values. So when you click on a line and when you move your cursor to the endpoint of this object, which is obviously a line, it should snap, but object snap should be turned on. So let's turn it on and move our cursor now. So now you can clearly say that it is a snapping to the endpoint of this line. So what about this line? When you move it close to this line, yes, it's snapping to this line. We've also seen that the midpoint snap is turned on. So here we have this line from this endpoint to this endpoint. Let's try to move a cursor close to the midpoint. So when you move close enough to the midpoint, a midpoint snap also appears. So that means you can snap it to the midpoint as well. Now let's look for some circular objects, and here we have a circular object, this circle. So when you move your cursor close enough to this circle, you'll see that a center snap appears. So even though my cursor is at the periphery or at the circumference of this circle, a center snap appears. And now if you click, your circle, your line directly snaps to the actual center, which is quite far from the circle. You can repeat the same process for other small circular objects also. For example, in this case we have a circle. Now if you bring your cursor close to the center, you'll see this center snap appears. So when you click, it will snap exactly to the center point of that circle. In AutoCAD 2016, we have a new feature with object snap, and that is geometrical center. So when you click on this button, which is adjacent to this object snap, then you'll see this geometrical center option. Turn it on, and now when you try to make an object and drag it towards the center, which is the geometrical center obviously for any of these objects, then it will snap to that point as well. So here you can see the geometrical center for this rectangle, and if you move it close enough to this polygon, which is a hexagon, you'll see its geometrical center as well. So with AutoCAD 2016, you can snap to the geometrical center of these geometries as well. Now let's look at some of the other points which are indicated in this object snap. Now the next point is node, which is point. So in order to snap to a point object, you need to turn node on. So let's type POINT for point and press enter, and let's make some points. So here we have a point. You might see point in a different way in your AutoCAD geometry. So you can type P type on your command line, press enter, and change the point type from this. Right now point type of this is selected in my case, so in your case it must be this default. You can change it to any other point type. Let's say that we have selected this one. Now if you move your cursor close enough to that point, it should snap to that point. If on object snap this node is turned on, otherwise it won't snap to that point. Let's turn quadrant on and now move our cursor close enough. So when you move your cursor close enough, you will see that it's snapping to the quadrant, another quadrant, third quadrant and fourth quadrant. So in this way you can snap to the quadrants using that quadrant as well. There are some intersection points also in this drawing. So in order to snap to those intersection points, you need to make sure that intersection is turned on. For example, in this case we have these two lines intersecting at this point. So let's go to this snap menu and turn off midpoint, and let's turn on intersection, which is already turned on. Now let's select line and move your cursor close enough to this, and when you do so you'll see that intersection is indicated, and now it's exactly snapping to the intersection point of these two lines. It can be a line or a circle or the intersection of line and circle or any other two geometries. There are other options as well in this object snap that I encourage you to explore on your own.